Jenny from the Sewing Palace in Helena, Montana, and I'm here to share with you some tips and techniques for our double dozen online quilt along. The book that we're using is by Kaye England, and it's a beautiful sampler quilt, and we are on month 6 already for our online quilt along, and the block this month is called Odd Fellows Chain. I want to show you a couple of things to break down the block, so come on over and take a peek at the block. We have them in colorways up above. We'll show you those here in a second. Here is the bright colorway from Kaye, and so it's being assembled. And then the one up above it is on point, and that's the traditional colorway. Look down below, we'll see the block as you break it down, and this is what it looks like in black and white. There's a couple of tools and gadgets I'll tell you about, but some things to think about when you're looking at a block like this is how are some simpler ways that you can maybe break it down. So if you look at these corners here, made out of half square triangles, so I have quite a few of those. There's 2 per corner, so that's 2, 4, 6, 8 half square triangles. So I'm going to show you another way to make half square triangles. And then it also has some flying geese units. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's some more hiding out here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's a total of 8 flying geese units, and I'm going to show you the 4 at a time method. Let's look at a couple of the gadgets that will be helpful when you go to start this project. So you'll want to have some best press, which is a lovely alternative to starch, and it will stiffen your fabric, but it will still be great to sew with, and it will prevent stretching. We're going to be dealing with some bias edges, and so it's very helpful for that. You want a nice sharp rotary cutter, and that's what I have here. You want a great pair of scissors. You want some sort of marking utensil so that you can mark your fabric. You want a cutting mat. I have a rotating cutting mat here with a portable iron that is cordless, and then a pressing mat, which you'll see here shortly. You also need a wonderful sewing machine that has a 1/4 inch option. On this machine, this is a Bernina 740. I have a 1/4 inch presser foot, and I also have the feature of dual feed engaged. When the presser foot is up, there is a little contraption to the back, and it pulls down and sits underneath the foot. So here I'm going to pull it down for you. It sits underneath the foot, and it helps feed the layers, so it's awesome for quilting. And this foot in particular is a 1/4 inch on either side of the foot. So those are some great gadgets to have to get you started. And of course you need some fabric. At the block again, over here on this bright colorway. And this is the center of the block, and it's basically a star. When you look at the outer edges of the block, it also forms a star. Just those units have half square triangles in them. The corners are a simple 4-patch with half square triangles. Last month we did a block that was called Star and a Star. So that block was quite simple as well. It still has flying geese units, which are here and here. But the difference between this month and last month is these outer flying geese units have another flying geese hidden inside. So that's what makes it a little bit more challenging and a couple more pieces to work with. When you're picking your fabrics, you'll want to have a medium, a dark, another dark, and a light. And if you look at the colorway up above, that's the traditional, our medium is not as dark, so you could try to darken that, or if you want that soft, subtle look, that one has pretty much a light medium as the center star. So those are some options for you to pick from. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to look at our book one more time, and we're going to simplify the corners of those half square triangle units. So that's half square triangle units are out here. These 4 patches there. And each one has 2. So there's 1, 2 per square. So since I have 8 needed, I'm going to show you a method that Bloc-Loc has published on their website. I'll have the link for this chart down below the video. But this is the chart that you would use. And it shows you step by step on how to get the fabrics ready to make 8 half square triangles at a time. When you're all done, you will use the lovely Bloc-Loc ruler to trim it up, and this is a Bloc-Loc half square triangle ruler. So the chart on the back tells you the measurements that you'll need in order to make the correct sizes. So we are going to be working with 1.5 inch finished half square triangle units, and it tells us to start with 2 5-inch squares. And I'll show you how to get started with that. So my half square triangle units are going to be made out of a light and a dark, and here they are right here. And when you lay them together, I starch them with the best press starch, and then I would cut them into 5-inch squares. I wanted to show you what the 5-inch square would look like. So you would cut that down, or you can just mark it and then cut it afterwards. You're going to be sewing on each side of these diagonal lines, so I'm going to get ready to sew this for you. And you're going to be sewing 1/4 of an inch from each side of that line. So as I'm sewing, I'm using right now the left side of the foot as a guide so that it's 1/4 of an inch away from the line, and I'll sew in each direction. So since I've cut this square, I actually haven't cut it to size, I'm just going to sew off of it and come down the other side. Use my lovely cutter, turn it around, and sew the other way. So I'm going to sew the other side for you here in a moment, and we'll cut it down. So now we're going to cut this apart. We've sewed on each side of the lines, and we're going to cut it down to 5 inches, which is from the chart. And those were my outer markings from before. So I'm just going to slice that down so that I have a 5-inch square. And then we're going to do some additional cutting. And this is what's cool about this technique, is you end up with 8 of these half square triangle units when you're all done. So you will cut on the diagonal line, which is right here, the marked line. So I'll cut diagonally. I will also keep my squares together, cut the other diagonal line. And I'm going to just butt my squares back up together, and then I'm going to cut it this way and that way. So since it was 5 inches, that halfway point is 2.5. So I'm going to slice that, put it back in there, and measure over to 2.5. Now the other nice thing about Bloc-Loc rulers is they give you a little extra wiggle room. So once you're all done, you're going to trim these down so that they're perfect. And look at how cool this is. There are my half square triangle units, and I have 8 of them, which is what I need. So I'm going to press those, and I would press those towards the dark. So I actually have one already pressed, and this is what it will look like. So once they're all pressed, you then trim them down using the Bloc-Loc half square triangle. And if you have the dark part of the fabric facing you, and you have your seam in that same direction, when you go to put your half square triangle ruler down, you should be able to read the logo, and it will lock into the seam correctly. So this is how it locks in, and if you look at the point, the diagonal line comes right to that point. If you lock it in incorrectly, it'll be offset. So there's this little edge that locks into, and now it's offset. So we don't want that. We want it dark seam facing you, lock it so you can see the logo, and now you're going to trim this down. We're going to trim it down to 2 inches. So let me go ahead and do that. Now I've just trimmed one side. All I have to do is now slide the ruler to the corresponding measurements, which is 2 inches, and I will trim off the excess fabric. And voila, you have a beautiful half square triangle. That will go into your block right here, and after you make all 8, you will have these units all prepared. This is what it will look like when it's all sewn together, and you'll make 4 of those. Well, now I'm going to tell you how to make the flying geese units. If we look at our block, when we look at the small flying geese units, we need a total of 8. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So we need a total of 8 of those. There's a super easy way to make these using the no-waste flying geese method. So this is also a chart that we'll have in the link below for the video. It's called No Waste Method. It's produced by Bloc-Loc, which are the creators of the ruler for the half square triangle, and they also make flying geese rulers. We're going to be using the 1.5 by 3 finished flying geese ruler. And when you look at that, it's over here on this chart, and I've highlighted it for you. These are the measurements that you're going to be cutting for your fabric. You're going to need 1 large square and 4 smaller squares. The 4 smaller squares will grow up to be the outside triangles for the flying geese, and that larger square will be the center. So when you get started for the colorway that I just showed you, the background is this polka dot, and then there's 4 of these. What you first do is you start off by cutting your pieces, pre-starching them, and then laying those pieces right sides together. We're only going to start with 2 of them, and they will lay right sides together diagonally, and you're going to mark a line from point to point. So I'm just going to use a straight edge ruler, and I'm going to mark a line from point to point. This is a friction pen, and it will go away when I iron it. Now you're also going to sew on each side of that line, and you're going to cut it apart. There, and one there. So once it's sewn and cut apart, you have a piece that looks like this. When you take it to your ironing board, you're going to press it up. So then you'll have a piece that looks like that. Remember, we still have 2 more of these squares left, and we're going to lay them right sides down, one in the one piece and one in the other one, because remember, we yielded 2. You're going to sew on each side of that. So let's go to the sewing machine and sew that real quick so you can see that process. So I'm a person that likes to start on a piece of fabric. I call it stoppy starties. And I always start sewing on a piece of fabric. And then when I feed in my next one, I just have a little tail of thread that's going to feed from one piece to the next. So I just feed in my fabric, and then I just start sewing. I'm going to go down this way. I'll slow it down just a little bit. And come off a little bit. And then I'll raise my foot, and I'll go to the other side. Now if you notice, I'm sewing on the left side of the foot. If you sew on the other side of the foot, that is also 1/4 inch when you're dealing with this presser foot, which is a Bernina 37D foot. So you want to make sure you have a 1/4 inch on both sides if you're going to use both sides of the foot. Otherwise, you'll be just using the right side. And then I sew off, and I come back to my stoppy starty. I stop, and then I remove this piece that is behind the machine. That is the one that I just sewed. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that apart on my diagonal line right here. And that will yield 2. The other will yield 2. And here's my flying geese. Let me press this real quick. And then we're going to square it up. So I'm using the Bloc-Loc ruler, and I've pressed my corners away from me. And the Bloc-Loc ruler will lock right into place. It will lock along this side, and along the top. It's just an awesome ruler. So when you're all done with a flying geese unit, you'll have a perfect piece. So you trim on all 4 sides. You just have a little bit of waste, but you also have a perfect block. I'm just going to rotate it so I can cut with my dominant hand a little bit easier. There we are. How cool is that? We've got a flying geese unit. Let me show you where it lives in the block. It should be right here. So there's your center star, and then you also need these 4 out here. All right, so now we're going to work on the larger flying geese units that have the little guy on the inside. So that unit is right here. It has the flying geese unit, some triangles on the side, a triangle here, and a triangle there. I've showed you a couple other ways to make some of the units, the flying geese and the half square triangles. So I deviated from the directions in the book, but now I'm following the directions in the book when I get to this step. So I've got the pieces here, and I'm going to pull them apart right here so that you can see how they're going to go together. So let's bring it over to the cutting mat and pull these pieces away. See that? So what you start with is the 2 side triangles. So these 2 side triangles need to form a V, so you need to make sure that they are lined up correctly. And these pieces were originally cut, I believe, 2 3/8, and then they're cut on the diagonal. When I cut these pieces, and I'm going to be having a bias edge on the outside, I starch like crazy. I want that fabric to behave as stiff as possible and not stretch. So this is really helpful when you get to this step. And then you want to lay these pieces down so you know which side you're sewing. So I know that on this piece, I need to sew this line right here. And when I put it into the bed of my sewing machine, I start sewing from the straight edge, not from the corner. So when I take this to my machine, I'm actually going to flip it over and start sewing from this side. I've also got my stoppy starty there. Started just coming off the fabric, and now I'm going to feed in. And now I'm using the right side of the foot as my guide for 1/4 inch. I come off that side, and then I will usually take and put another piece of fabric right underneath and sew onto that. And then I will have my half square or my flying geese unit ready to cut out and press. So there's that piece, and then you'll sew the other side. So I'm going to come back over here and kind of just show you that. So you'll get to this part where you will have the side sewn on. All right? So you'll have a piece that looks like this. Now you have these little, what looks like little teeth coming off the bottom of it. Those are called dog ears, and they're supposed to be there. When you go to sew this triangle on, what you're going to do is you're going to find the center point of this triangle. Now this triangle was cut larger, and it was cut as a 4 1/4, and then it was cut diagonally twice. So it was cut like this 2 times. So you end up with 4 of these out of 1 square. Here's my center point for my block. So what I do is I fold this in half, press it with my finger, and then I have a nice crease, and that crease should line up with that center point. And now I'm going to sew like that. Okay? Still using my 1/4 inch seam along the side, feeding slowly but surely, not stretching the fabric, coming off the back, turn it off, and then I put in my good old trusty stoppy starty again and take out my piece. All right, so now you have a piece like that. You'll want to press it so that it lays flat, and you can trim these dog ears now. So I usually wait to trim those until I get to this stage instead of doing it 2 separate times. Once those are trimmed, you will then add your triangles to the side. All right, so here we are. I'm just gonna show you a little trick for trimming this down. I have a Bloc-Loc flying geese ruler here that's a little bit larger. We've been using this in this quilt along so far. This is the 3 by 6 inch finished. And I'm just gonna trim these dog ears off. So what I'm gonna use is the ruler to help me out. So when I lock this ruler into place, I can lock into these seams, and it will make sure that I have my 1/4 inch reveal from that edge. And then when I square this up, I'm going to square it up properly. So I'll just rotate that, and I will have a wedge that I can sew in very nicely to my project. And it will give me a reference point for where I need to sew. Now when I sew those pieces, you're going to sew one side, press it, and then sew the other side and press it. So when you're all done, you should have a piece that looks like this. Now this unit should be a 3 by 6 inch flying geese unit. And you can double check yourself by lining up this ruler and seeing how close am I, or did I get some stretching? And I have a little stretching, I don't have quite enough fabric there, and I have a little extra here. So I can square that block up and then put it into my quilt block and start to assemble it. So let's go look at how that's gonna go. So this unit will go here, and then you guys saw these units earlier. Pretty cool, huh? So there we have an Oddfellows chain block. Thanks for joining us at the Sewing Palace for our online quilt along and Kaye England's Double Dozen book.